Washington Journal continues.
Welcome back. We're going to continue our discussion of the Gaza ceasefire as well as Trump's Middle East peace plan. Here to join me for that is Mark Dubowitz of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. Welcome to Washington Journal.
Thanks for having me, Kimberly.
Can you talk a little bit about the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, your group, what you do, and how you're funded?
Yeah, so FDD is a Washington think tank, about 100 people. Our mission is to defend democracies, the United States, and other beleaguered democracies like Israel, Taiwan, Ukraine, Japan, South Korea. Those democracies are under threat from what we call the axis of aggressors, which is really China, Iran, North Korea, and Russia. We don't take any foreign government funding. We're funded by American citizens. And we've been in business for 23 years. We were conceived of 2 weeks before 9/11 by the late, great Jeane Kirkpatrick, who was Ronald Reagan's ambassador, a Democrat who crossed the floor to work for President Reagan. And she was very concerned at the time that the terrorism being directed against America abroad, but also against Israel and other democracies, would one day come to America's shores. And sure enough, 2 weeks later, 9/11 occurred, and we opened our doors shortly after that.
Just to recap sort of some of the details from President Trump's 20-point plan, it includes several issues that have been sort of non-starters for Hamas and Israel, but it requires Gaza to be initially governed by a temporary committee of technocrats, including qualified Palestinians and international experts that would be responsible for running public services in Gaza, that Palestinians would be allowed to remain in Gaza, and that those who wish to leave would be free to do so in return. Big sticking point, and this one is controversial in the past, Hamas and allied factions giving up any role governing Gaza and agree to disarm, handing over weapons in a decommissioning process overseen by independent monitors, a temporary international stabilization force organized by the U.S. with Arab nations and other countries to deploy in Gaza, and then Israel would not occupy or annex Gaza. And it also includes a provision for creating a credible pathway to Palestinian self-determination and statehood, which that we recognize, and this is in the quote, as the aspiration of the Palestinian people, which is something that particularly Prime Minister Netanyahu has expressed quite a bit of opposition to. What is your reaction to the likelihood of all of these things moving forward?
Well, I think it's going to be very, very complicated and very difficult. I think this first phase is really important, is to get these American and Israeli hostages finally back. 48 hostages, 20 we believe are alive, 28 who have been murdered, and their bodies will be returned. And that seems to, hopefully, if all goes well in the coming hours, that'll take place. There's a ceasefire. Israel is committed to that. And now the real hard work is going to begin, and I hope for President Trump, he will remain very focused on this, because there's going to be a lot of tough negotiations ahead. Hamas certainly does not want to give up its weapons, even though that is absolutely an essential part of this peace plan, and that's going to be a critical element of any kind of reconstruction, any kind of path forward for peace and stability in that area and in the region, is that Hamas is fully disarmed.
What about this idea of Palestinian statehood? Because this has been something that does not enjoy much support in Israel.
Well, it used to enjoy a lot of support in Israel. The majority of Israelis supported a Palestinian state, but after waves of terrorism, and especially after October 7th, I think the vast majority of Israelis from left to right are opposed to Palestinian statehood, certainly now, because their experience has been anytime they've withdrawn from territory, they withdrew from Gaza, they withdrew from major chunks of the West Bank, they withdrew certainly from southern Lebanon. That's all been replaced by waves of terror. So they don't want to repeat that same mistake again and withdraw again from territory and find that Palestinians now have tens of thousands of missiles and rockets aimed at their cities and open borders to commit more terrorist atrocities like October 7th.
I want to play a clip from Thursday with Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu giving thanks to the Trump administration for the work to bring this war to an end. Let's listen.
Momentous development in the last 2 years. We fought during these 2 years to achieve our war aims, and a central one of these war aims is to return the hostages, all of the hostages, the living and the dead. And we're about to achieve that goal. We couldn't have achieved it without the extraordinary help of President Trump and his team, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. They worked tirelessly with Ron and his team, our team. That and the courage of our soldiers who entered Gaza and the combined military and diplomatic pressure that isolated Hamas, I think, has brought us to this point. I want to personally thank both of you, Steve, Jared. It's been long hours. You worked around the clock, but not only worked. I think you put in your brains and your hearts, and we know that it's for the benefit of Israel and the United States, for the benefit of decent people everywhere, and for the benefit of these families who will finally get to be with their loved ones. And I want to thank you on their behalf as well, and on behalf of the people of Israel. Thank you.
Mark, Prime Minister Netanyahu was crediting the military and diplomatic pressure for Hamas to agree to the initial plan. What pressures do you think might have encouraged Israel to agree to this plan?
Well, I think the Prime Minister clearly stated his objectives after October 7th. And I think that having realized most of those objectives, I think the Prime Minister was keen to move forward and find a ceasefire and a return of hostages. And the President realized that, I think, from the beginning when he came into office, that there was going to be no daylight between Israel and the United States. He was going to provide full military support to Israel to do what they needed to do to destroy Hamas and their control over Gaza and their control over the Palestinian people, and then really flip the script on Hamas and get the regional actors, the Saudis, Emiratis, Turks, the Qataris, the Egyptians, to come together and support this deal. And that, I think, made the biggest difference. It was military pressure from Israel and then the political pressure from the United States in coordination with its closest regional allies.
Do you think the political and diplomatic pressure globally about the humanitarian situation in Gaza played a role here?
I think it actually played a counterproductive role. I think the attempt to isolate Israel, the attempt to deny that October 7th was a terrorist atrocity, the waves of protests, the pro-Hamas protests that we see in the United States and the UK and around the world, I think hardened Israeli resolve, and for the Israelis made it clear that these countries had no understanding of what Israeli society had gone through. It was really President Trump who was decisive in coming in January and again, flipping that script and saying, listen, we appreciate that October 7th was the most tragic day for the Jewish people since the Holocaust. We, the United States, are going to back you against this terrorist organization, a U.S.-designated terrorist organization that's also killed and maimed hundreds of Americans. And we're going to provide you that support, and then we're going to try to find a way, while we're destroying Hamas militarily, to find a political solution to end the war.
I want to play another clip from that press conference on Thursday. President Trump's special envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, speaking about that pressure that Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu put on Hamas.
Our job was the Prime Minister's. He had the job of protecting this country. He had the job of making tough choices with regard to how tough to be with Hamas, when to be flexible, when not to be flexible. I think to myself all the time, I lost sleep over it. What would I have done in some of those circumstances? There were times that I thought we should be more flexible, or your country should be more flexible. But the truth is, as I look back, I don't think we get to this place without Prime Minister Netanyahu playing it out. And I'm not just saying that. They're not just words. The President believes that. My President believes it. He believes that Prime Minister Netanyahu made some very, very difficult calls, and lesser people would not have made those calls. And here we are today because Hamas had to, they had to do this deal. The pressure was on them, they were backed up, and you've got the bigger army, you were making inroads, and that's what led to this deal.
There's reporting in the Wall Street Journal today that Hamas has told Israel it has 20 living Israeli hostages in hand and is ready to begin releasing them as early as Sunday. Then the Prime Minister of Israel's office said on X that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, this was earlier today, has just spoken with coordinator for the hostages and missing, Brigadier General Gal Hirsch. Prime Minister Netanyahu says Israel is prepared and ready to immediately receive all of our hostages. Those hostages were a key piece of leverage for Hamas, although it's painful to describe them that way. Once they're released, what approach do you think Israel and other countries will take with Hamas?
Well, it's all laid out in President Trump's peace plan. I mean, it's there. It's 20 points. Hamas must be disarmed. They must play no role in the governance of Gaza. Hamas terrorists can decide to leave if they want and can go to other countries. And then we can move forward on this peace plan. And I think Kimberly, it's really important to understand this is not just the U.S. demand or the Israeli demand, but this is the demand from these Arab countries and Muslim countries, all of whom understand what a threat Hamas represents to the Palestinians, to the people of Gaza, and to their own countries. And so these are demands that are coming from the regional players who know Hamas best. And they understand that Hamas, which is the Palestinian wing of the Muslim Brotherhood, is an Islamist terrorist organization that threatens their rule as well as the safety and security of Israelis and Gazans. So this is a pretty clear demand that Hamas needs to comply. They've given back the hostages finally after 2 years of this brutal war, and now they need to step aside and let other Palestinians and Arabs and Muslims rule this territory.
If you have questions for Mark Dubowitz of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, our phone lines for Republicans, 202-748-8001, for Democrats, 202-748-8000, and for Independents, 202-748-8002. Before we get to our callers, I'd like to know what you make of President Trump's proposed Board of Peace and the role that he'll play in particular in if this peace agreement continues.
Well, I think it's really important. I mean, it's quite remarkable that the president wants to chair this board because he really is putting his reputation and his legacy on the line. It's going to be this board that oversees the implementation of this 20-point plan. And so instead of just kicking it off to someone else and not taking the responsibility, President Trump is assuming a huge amount of responsibility here. And clearly, this could go badly wrong. I mean, Hamas has shown over the past not only 2 years, but the past 40 years, that it is not willing to comply with international demands. It is often defied those international demands, and I would expect that it would do so again. I don't expect Hamas is going to disarm. I don't expect they're going to voluntarily step away. They are a dedicated, hardcore, ideological, jihadist terrorist organization. You don't just give that up overnight and decide to slink into the night. So President Trump has taken on a huge amount of responsibility and accountability for this plan.
President Trump is headed to the Middle East later today, and what are you looking for from that trip, or what are you expecting to hear from him?
Well, he's going to address the Israeli Knesset, the Israeli parliament, which would be an extraordinary moment, I think. I think he's going to express this long-standing desire that he's had to get these hostages back. I mean, he's really made an emotional and personal commitment to this. So I think you'll hear words to that effect. But also, he will be calling out the region and the international community to stand by this peace plan. He's only coming in for a few hours, which was an extraordinarily long trip to go halfway around the world just for a few hours. But I think it just shows his personal commitment to this and his belief that he can bring peace to the Middle East after, well, decades, if not hundreds of years of failures. So I think everybody's wishing him well, but there's going to be some tough obstacles ahead.
Do you think the president deserved the Nobel Peace Prize?
Well, I was delighted to see that the Venezuelan opposition leader got it. I think she's a remarkable woman who has stood in opposition to dictators in Venezuela. So I think she deserves it. But I think the next Peace Prize should go to President Trump. And obviously he's done extraordinary work here, winding down this conflict in a way that unfortunately President Biden couldn't, and previous U.S. presidents have been unable to. So I think next year's Peace Prize should be his.
If you have questions for Mark Dubowitz of the Foundation of Defense of Democracies, you can call us at, again, 202-748-8001 for Republicans, 202-748-8000 for Democrats, and 202-748-8002 for Independents. We'll start with Evie in Albany, Georgia, on our line for Republicans. Good morning, Evie.
Yes, good morning, and good morning to C-SPAN. And you're looking beautiful today, dear, with your outfit. I love that on you. One of the things that I think that we're forgetting, if you could put up the picture of the Gaza destruction behind us so that we can see what we're talking about here. What we're talking about is a place, a historical antiquity place that has been completely, I have been to Israel, and I just, my heart is broken over this. Now, we're talking about words, a so-called Trump 20-point plan. Now, they just had this morning the construct of this plan, which is basically some PowerPoint items that has been put into structures of paragraphs to claim plan. We have Netanyahu is not there, but somehow, as the lady said, Jared Kushner and his wife, his daughter, are there. They are not political representatives of the government, but the main representative who is not there is Netanyahu. And this man who just stated that...
Evie, Prime Minister Netanyahu is in Israel. Is that what... I don't understand what you're saying.
They are at the summit. You know, Egypt is the land of peace. That is what the Egypt, and they've had many summits. They had the Bahrain. I tell you who I'd love to have you to bring on to talk about this is...
Before that, Evie, did you have a question for Mr. Dubowitz?
Yes, my question is, could you please not have, if this gentleman would talk to us about the context of the plan, that of the destruction that we see on the television, our eyes, not words, where millions of people are going to have to live tomorrow after we have this show of flying across the country. You know,
Evie, I think we have the broad idea of your point. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I think one must remember, Kimberly, that October 7th, there was a ceasefire between Hamas and Israel, and on that day, Hamas violated that ceasefire. They invaded Israel. They killed 1,200 Israelis, Americans, and others. They raped, they tortured, they burned people, and they took over 240 hostages back into the dungeons in Gaza. So every death is Hamas's responsibility. Every Palestinian death, every Israeli death, every American death is Hamas's responsibility. And you're right, and the caller's right. There's devastation. There's devastation in Gaza. There's devastation in those communities in Israel. And this is now a moment for rebuilding. And I think President Trump is committed to rebuilding, to reconstruction. I would say one thing about the Egyptians. Throughout the entire 2 years of war, the Egyptians have refused to allow Gazans to cross the Egyptian-Gaza border and seek shelter in the northern Sinai of Egypt, which is completely unpopulated and would have been a perfect place for Gazans to have waited out the war. In fact, the Emiratis offered $40 billion to the Egyptian leader to help his economy and to build communities there for Gazans. He absolutely refused because he didn't want any Palestinians on 1 inch of Egyptian soil, which was really tragic and as a result led to a significant loss in life.
Denise is in Riverdale, Georgia, also on our line for Democrats. Good morning, Denise.
Hey, how you doing?
Denise, make sure to turn down the volume on your TV first, and then you can go ahead with your question for Mark Dubowitz.
Right. I'm calling about all this war that they have over there is about land. It's all about land. We want your land. We want our land back. So what are the Jews going to do? They're going to continue to take their land, make them live up under their rules. We let food in. We determine what you could get in, your water. The Palestinians were there first. That's just like if I invite you to my house and I say, okay, you under stress, come on in my house. And the next thing I know you taking my house over. That's exactly what they done to these people. So I think that they should give them a state, give them some of their land back, and then everybody can live in peace. That's what I think.
Your response?
Yeah, I mean, Denise, so, I mean, first of all, it's worth remembering that the Jews are the indigenous people of that area. For, over 2,000 years, they've been there. They've been speaking the same language, Hebrew, praying to the same God, and they have been there for millennia. If you want to fast forward to modern history, Denise is right. I mean, it would make the most sense to divide that territory and create two states, and that's exactly why the Israelis have been offering repeatedly to do so. In fact, the international community, when it created the State of Israel, the modern State of Israel, in 1947, it specifically mandated that there would be two states. The Jews accepted that, the Arabs rejected that. They invaded Israel in the 1948 war, lost. They lost in 48, 56, 67, 73. They've repeatedly lost. Hamas again invaded in 2023, lost again. So at some point, the Palestinians have to take yes for an answer. They have to say yes to peaceful coexistence instead of yes to more violence and more invasions. You can't keep losing wars and then claiming that you are on the weaker side. If you lose a war, then you need to acknowledge that you've lost the war, and then you need to go to the negotiation table, and you have to give up your weapons, and you have to peacefully negotiate a settlement. But if you keep invading Israel, Israel has the right to defend itself, and it'll continue doing so.
Nicholas is in Peachtree City, Georgia, on our line for Independence. Good morning, Nicholas.
Hey, you made a point in your show to the effect of saying every time Israel sees land, it motivates a terrorist attack. And I was just looking to press you on this point because I don't think Palestinians or Arabs or, the other people in the region are motivated by a primordial hatred of Israel or Jews. There's very real history and conflict, or excuse me. There's a very real history of suffering and oppression, and at this point, since before 48, a very real, track record of poor behavior. So I would like to ask the question as to what do you think motivates the, people, innocent, people that start off as innocent little children to grow up and become terrorists?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I'm not sort of reading into people's intentions. I just read the Hamas charter, which explicitly calls for the elimination of Israel and the destruction of Jews. So, I mean, they've been very explicit, and I think we should be serious. We should take people at their word. We should be serious about what they're committed to, and they're hard men committed to hard ideas. What motivates people? I mean, I think what motivates people is an ideological commitment to what they call jihadism, and it's the same ideological commitment that Al-Qaeda and ISIS and Hezbollah and other terrorist organizations around the world have committed to, and that is to kill not just Jews, not just Israelis, but to kill Americans. And that's why we faced waves of terrorist attacks in the 1990s, culminating with 9/11. And then we had to go into the Middle East and fight ISIS, because ISIS was committed again to killing Americans, and we've seen terrorist attacks on American soil. So I think we've got to remember this is not about land. If it was about land, this conflict would have been solved decades ago, because the Israelis offered a formula called land for peace. It was offered repeatedly, most notably in the 1990s under the auspices of President Bill Clinton. And you've got these Palestinian rejectionist groups who continue to reject this formula of land for peace and are committed to an ideological struggle. Let's be serious about acknowledging this ideological struggle and figuring out ways to combat it, rather than living under the illusion that somehow they don't really believe in their ideas and that they're not committed to what they say and what they write.
Mike is in Jarrettsville, Maryland, on our line for Republicans. Good morning, Mike.
Hey, good morning, C-SPAN. Listen, maybe you could explain this to me, Mr. Dubowitz, like I'm a fifth grader. I understand that Hamas is a terrorist organization. U.S. policy, I believe, is not to negotiate with terrorists. So that's kind of like number one. I'm kind of stuck on that these guys are terrorists. and yet we're negotiating with them. And I guess my other question was, Trump has said, the last little clip that we saw of him on his way to the Middle East, said something to the effect of, he's going to get the hostages back. Isn't that wonderful? Everyone has really wanted that. But other than that, more than that, he wasn't very positive on. He just said basically, we're definitely probably going to get the hostages, we think, 100, maybe 99%. But then after that, he's not really sure how this is going to go. And the last thing I want to say was that the organization, with all respect, Mr. Dubowitz, listen, Ukraine, honestly, is not a democracy. We'd like it to be, but maybe you could call your organization like an incubator for democracies. Hey, thanks, C-SPAN. Talk to you later.
All right. Thanks, Mike. Look, Mike, you're right. I mean, we say we're not going to negotiate with terrorists. The Israelis say they're not going to negotiate with terrorists, and then we negotiate with terrorists, and we give terrorists concessions, and then we're surprised when we get more terrorism. So you're right. I mean, this is a completely perverse set of incentives. We shouldn't be negotiating with terrorists. We should be doing what Israel has done since October 7th and what we did during the war of terror, which is to take the fight to the terrorists, ensure that they don't have control over land, that they don't have weapons, and to isolate them and marginalize them, and ultimately show their people that this ideology of terrorism is only going to bring more death and destruction. So I think you're exactly right in this thing. I think Israel is faced with no choice right now. They need to get their people back. Again, they're American hostages. We need to get our people back. So we're ending up having to negotiate with this brutal terrorist organization. We believe in defending our democratic allies. Ukraine is a democracy. Zelensky was elected. Is it a perfect democracy? No. Does it have elements of corruption there? Yes. But it's hard to find perfect democracies anywhere in the world. And Ukraine has been fighting against a brutal authoritarian regime in Russia. Putin invaded Ukraine twice, and the Ukrainians have been fighting bravely against Putin and the Russian military. And by the way, it's worth remembering, I mean, Russia has historically been one of our main enemies. Ukraine has been fighting against one of our most dangerous enemies without costing one American life. We're just, we should be defending them. We should be defending Taiwan. We should be defending any country willing to fight in its own defense. And I think that's why most Americans defend Israel, because the Israelis have demonstrated that they will fight in their own defense, they will die in their own defense, and they'll do so against common enemies, against radical Islam, against the Islamic Republic of Iran, against regimes and terrorist organizations that threaten Americans. And they don't ask for American boots on the ground. They ask us to support them politically and militarily, and they'll do the fighting, as the Ukrainians have done for a number of long years.
Ben is in Montclair, New Jersey, on our line for Democrats. Good morning, Ben.
Hi. I just wanted to ask, why is it that Hamas have to surrender or give up their weapons and Israeli don't have to give up their weapons? And also, I want to say, I don't really consider this to be like a war, because a war is when, two countries are equally armed to defend themselves, whereas Hamas don't really have any weapons. Israel has the weapons and the backing of the United States. So it's not really like a war. And the thing is also... Hello?
We're listening, Ben, but did you have a specific question for Mr. Dubowitz?
Yes, I think he says that Americans support Israel. I think American supports Israel because I believe the American people are somewhat misinformed of what's really going on. And why aren't they showing the images of the Gaza Strip and the destruction of how Israel have totally, it's like collective punishment. Whatever the Hamas people did on October 7th, why is it that the innocent Palestinians have to pay for the collective punishment?
Okay, let's let Mr. Dubowitz respond.
So, Ben, you need to understand, and I think it's worth going back before October 7th. Israel withdrew from Gaza in 2005. There was an election, and Hamas took over. They brutalized Palestinians. They threw Palestinian Authority personnel from the roofs. They shot them in the kneecaps. They took over. They then proceeded to turn Gaza not into the Riviera, not into the Singapore of the Middle East. They turned it into a heavily armed, heavily fortified battle space where they dug 500 kilometers of tunnels, not to provide bomb shelters for Palestinian civilians, but to provide places for Hamas terrorists to operate and store their weapons. Then, with the assistance of Iran, became heavily armed with tens of thousands of rockets and missiles and tens of thousands of Hamas terrorists. Then they broke a ceasefire and they launched an invasion October 7th, and they slaughtered 1,200 Israelis, Americans, and others, raped women, burnt babies, tortured, and took 250 hostages. Okay, so heavily armed military with weapons supplied by Iran, and they launched an invasion. I think, Ben, you would agree, I think most viewers would agree, Israel has a right to self-defense, and Israel had the right to go into that incredibly complicated urban battle space where Hamas was using Palestinian civilians as human shields. Their entire strategy is to maximize the number of deaths on the Israeli side and on the Palestinian side. And as we, the United States, have discovered when we've been in Raqqa, in Mosul, and in urban environments in World War II, when we fought all our way through Europe, it is excruciatingly difficult to fight the enemy when the enemy is using civilians as human shields. The United States and the Allies also, unfortunately, left devastation in their wake during World War II and during the fight against ISIS in Iraq and in Syria. And the Israelis have, unfortunately, despite the fact that they've tried to minimize civilian casualties, have done the same. And that's, by the way, I just want to finish, that's why 914 Israeli soldiers have been killed, 6,320 have been injured, including many with severe wounds. They could have very easily have destroyed Gaza from the air without sending in their men and women house to house in this brutal urban environment and risking all the lives that they lost and all the injuries that they sustained.
Valdez is in Mapleton, Illinois, on our line for independence. Good morning, Valdez.
Yeah, good morning. This is a tough one because everything Mr. Dubowitz is saying has been just basically the burning babies and October 7th and all that kind of thing. We all know that happened. That's a fact. But what you're not saying is how many people were brutalized on the Palestinian side previously. I'm a former soldier, enlisted, not drafted, a former police officer. I've been in public service and military service. I know what murder looks like, Mr. Dubowitz. And this is the same playbook that we used against the indigenous people. Attack them, put it in the news of the day. I'm an Old West buff. Read the news of the day. Oh, the Redskins and the savages, they attacked the settlers. They didn't tell you that they were killed them first, went into their villages and obliterated them. Israel has been doing these kinds of things to these people for so long that I just can't even begin to grasp the kind of devastation. Remember what Minister Gallant said? There are no innocent Palestinians. So conversely, Mr. Dubowitz, there are no innocent Israelis, is there?
Well, again, sir, thank you for your service. Clearly, your service was not in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, because if you were serving in that, you would know the history of it. And unfortunately, the history of it is repeated offers by Israelis and Americans to the Palestinians for peace, and repeated rejection of those peaceful offers by Palestinian leaders. Now, I'm not saying every Palestinian is complicit in this. Of course not. There are many innocent Palestinians, but they've had terrible leaders who have decided not to accept peace offers and instead to wage war against Israel. If our southern neighbors in Mexico or our northern neighbors in Canada had decided to wage war against the American homeland repeatedly over decades, we would use overwhelming force to protect our people. And, sir, you would be there defending the American people, as you've done in the past. And I'm sure in your service you've defended the American people. And so we would never countenance our northern and southern neighbors launching terrorist attacks across our borders and slaughtering Americans. In fact, when al-Qaeda did that in 9/11, we went to war. We fought the war on terrorism. We flew halfway around the world to Iraq and to Afghanistan and then to Syria to ensure that al-Qaeda and ISIS couldn't threaten Americans. And that's what Israelis have done. I think President Trump is right to put forward a peace plan that makes sure that there's no role for this brutal terrorist organization, Hamas, anymore, and to move forward on some kind of peace plan that brings some hope and peace and stability not only to Israelis but to Palestinians in Gaza as well. And thankfully this is being supported by dozens of Arab and Muslim countries who also understand how brutal and damaging and threatening and destructive Hamas has been for the Palestinian people.
We have a question that we received via text from Teresa in Little Rock, Arkansas, who says, Hamas is not the only terrorists in this region. Does this plan cover the other groups?
Yeah, Teresa, that's a great question. This peace plan specifically relates to Gaza and Hamas. There is another terrorist organization operating in Gaza called Palestinian Islamic Jihad, which is fully funded and supported by the Islamic Republic of Iran. So that would be covered under this plan as well. But these other terrorist organizations, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, the Iraqi Shiite militias, and other terrorist organizations that threaten Israel and the United States are not covered specifically in this plan. But I think it's worth remembering that with the backing of the United States since October 7th, Israel fought a seven-front war against what I call the Axis of Misery, which is this proxy terrorist network that the Islamic Republic of Iran had funded and established and weaponized for all these decades. And Israel's done a remarkable job of severely degrading this terrorist network. It's not been eliminated, but certainly it has been severely degraded. And many of these terrorist organizations are responsible for killing Americans. I think we should always underscore that these terrorist organizations have American blood on their hand, and the Israelis have been bringing justice to these terrorist organizations, not only on behalf of Israelis, but on behalf of Americans.
Mark is in Canton, Ohio, on our line for Republicans. Good morning, Mark.
Good morning. Thank you for C-SPAN, for such an incredible, clear-eyed, clear-thinking guest. Sir, I have two quick questions. Number one, if all the deceased, the 28 hostages, are not returned, will that cause a problem? And number two, you mentioned Taiwan a few minutes ago as a democracy. My personal belief, and it's also the belief of other people in D.C. think tanks, is that Taiwan is a kabuki theater of democracy, and it's hand in glove with the PRC in order to sham us, in order to get technology from the United States. And finally, that gentleman that called from the U.S. military, I'm a retired Navy veteran. There are no innocent indigenous American natives. They slaughtered each other over territory all the time. Thank you very much.
Thanks for your questions, Mark, and thank you for your service. So you're right, actually, in pointing out that if all these bodies are not returned, and Hamas has already said they're not sure where all the bodies are, I think that's not true. But if they don't return these bodies to the families, so these families can give their loved ones a proper burial, it's going to greatly complicate the implementation of President Trump's peace plan. So we're hoping, and I think as Americans, we're hoping these bodies return, because these bodies also include Americans who've been killed and murdered by Hamas. With respect to Taiwan, we can have a whole discussion about Taiwan. I spent a lot of time in Taiwan. I think Taiwan is, a very vibrant democracy under threat by the Chinese Communist Party. But you're right. The Chinese Communists have really done a lot of work to try to infiltrate that democracy. They run foreign influence operations against the Taiwanese democracy. They have agents in Taiwan. They try to influence the political process there. So the Taiwanese democracy is certainly under threat, not just militarily by the People's Liberation Army, but also through cognitive warfare, economic warfare, and cyber warfare by the Chinese Communist Party. And again, I don't want to get into debate about American history and the indigenous people of America, but I would say, again, just worth underscoring, because a lot of people forget that the indigenous people of that area are the Jews who've been there for thousands of years. There's been a continual Jewish presence in the holy city of Jerusalem. And I think if it's a very easy concept that today, if these terrorists were to lay down their arms, there would be peace. If the Israelis were to lay down their arms, they would be destroyed. I think it's worth keeping in mind that very simple conception of how one side looks at the conflict and how the other side does as well.
Skip in Michigan asks us via text, where will the released Palestinian terrorists go?
Yeah, Skip, thanks for bringing that up. I've neglected to talk about the other side. So there are going to be 2,000 Palestinian terrorists released, and of that, 250 of them are terrorists who have received multiple life sentences for murdering hundreds of Israelis and Americans. And they will be released into Gaza. Some of them will be sent abroad. I don't believe any of them are going to be sent into the West Bank or Judea and Samaria. And it's a bitter pill for Israelis and Americans to swallow, because when you look at the slaughter that these Palestinian terrorists who are being released were responsible for, it will make you sick to your stomach, how they slaughtered really hundreds, if not thousands, of Israelis, killed and maimed Americans. And these are men who have been in jail for their entire lives and are now being released because Israel wants to get its hostages back.
Is that all 2,000 of the people representing the group that you're talking about?
Yeah, so these are 2,000 Palestinian terrorists who will be released, of which 250 of the two are serving life sentences.
Okay. Ray is in California on our line for Democrats. Good morning, Ray.
Oh, thank you for taking my call, and good morning. So I'm wondering if this peace plan, once initiated, will Israel still be in charge of the water, the fuel, the electricity, the mail, and will Gaza still be enclosed behind 40-foot walls?
Well, the goal, right, is that ultimately they wouldn't be. The goal is, if you can get rid of Hamas, if you can stop Hamas using the territory to import weapons to threaten Israel, if you can get rid of Hamas and replace it with a peaceful Palestinian government backed by this international stabilization force comprised of Arab and Muslim countries, then ultimately over time, Gaza can become a self-sustaining entity that's not going to be a threat to Israel anymore. And if it's not a threat to Israel anymore, Israel has no need to patrol the borders, no need to block the importation of weapons. But for now, clearly Israel has to stay in control of those borders, because it was through those borders that Hamas launched the October 7th invasion. And so Israeli soldiers are going to have to patrol this and ensure that Hamas doesn't reconstitute itself and then represent a threat not just to Israel, but to Gazans as well. So this is all part of President Trump's 20-point plan. Of course, there's a lot of steps to go on the implementation to get to the prospect where Gaza will no longer be a threat and will be a peaceful, stable, and prosperous place.
Joyce is in Brooklyn, New York on our line for Independence. Good morning, Joyce.
Good morning. I wanted to first of all say thank you to Mark Dubowitz, because he's been amazingly clear-headed and calm and specific when he's talking about what has happened and what is happening now in terms of Hamas and in Israel's response. And I think it's sad that many of the people who are calling in are unfortunately seem to just really have no knowledge of what was happening there. And my question is about, it seems like a lot of the talking points, which are basically talking points from Hamas, have become accepted, things that people who you wouldn't expect would be supporting terrorists are saying as though they were facts when they're really not based in facts. And how in this country do we respond to the fact that there's people, some of them I'm sure with good intentions, who are saying things they don't seem to really understand that Israel really, really is the indigenous home of the Jewish people. They don't seem to really understand that Hamas has made it clear that they don't care how many women and children, Palestinians, die as long as it serves their purposes to destroy Israel. How in this country are we supposed to react when there's so many people saying things which really are not based in fact and
so
really
Joyce,
not
I want to
helpful?
let Mark respond, just because we're just about out of time.
Yeah, thanks, Joyce. And look, Joyce, you're pointing to something which I think is incredibly difficult to understand, as you've underscored. I think Hamas has run one of the most successful information wars or influence operations really in modern warfare. And I think that you see the results of that. This terrorist organization, designated by the United States, designated by Canada, by the Europeans, designated by a number of Arab countries. This is a terrorist organization that is slaughtered innocent people. And yet, for some reason, particularly in the demographic, the young demographic, the people that are getting their news from TikTok and social media, that the majority of the young in America support Hamas over Israel. Now, Israel is a democracy. It's an imperfect one. It has many problems. You may not like Prime Minister Netanyahu. You may not like his cabinet, but he will be voted out in a democratic election. And the United States and Israel have had a long-standing, close relationship. The Israelis have been responsible for saving hundreds, if not thousands, of American lives through providing intelligence and counterterrorism cooperation. And yet, with that incredibly close relationship, this information warfare run by Hamas and its enablers has been incredibly successful in turning otherwise well-intentioned people who want to just see peace and stability in the region and the world into Hamas apologists. We've seen hundreds of thousands of people on our streets in America with Hamas flags taking over our bridges, our streets, our universities. I mean, it's quite remarkable to see not support for Palestinians and innocent Palestinians, but support for Hamas. Again, a terrorist organization that's killed Americans. It's sad, but I think it points to the fact that we live in a post-truth reality where people are actually not interested in facts and evidence, but they support agendas. And when you've got that kind of environment, it's very easy for our enemies, not just Hamas, but the Chinese Communist Party, the Islamic Republic of Iran, Putin's Russia, the Muslim Brotherhood, to run information operations and influence campaigns to confuse the American people, to divide the American people, to undermine our own democracy. It really speaks to a significant threat to our democracy and the democracies of our allies.
Thank you so much for your time today. This was Mark Dubowitz, who is the CEO of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Really appreciate your time this morning.
Thanks, Kimberly, for having me.